To start off, my daily take today over at HartmannReport.com is titled "The Plantation Politics of MAGA America." Is this the future that we want? And what I'm starting out, the meme I'm starting out with is that welcome to your first full day in the Confederate States of America. Much like the old Confederacy, the new Confederacy is devoted to making America as white as possible, stripping women and minorities of political and economic power, gutting workers' rights, rigging election outcomes, leaders nakedly taking bribes, using the phony veneer of Christianity to justify brutal policies, making queer people invisible, reconfiguring schools for indoctrination, having militias terrorize minorities and their opponents, and maintaining a government of, by, and for rich white men. And that last point, I mean, never before in American history have we seen a group of men representing so much wealth and so much power as we saw yesterday, $1 trillion worth of wealth sitting there with Donald Trump. And, and they got better seats than any member of Congress or, pretty much anybody. I mean, this is his priority. He is establishing an oligarchy and proudly proclaiming it for all practical purposes. Make America white again. Back in 1924, we got an Immigration Act. It was called the Immigration Act of 24, right? That said that immigrants to the United States must be allowed by our court system based on maintaining the racial balance of the United States in 1890. Now, the reason why Republicans, and it was Republicans who ran the country in 1924 when this was passed, the reason why this was, I believe, the Harding administration. The reason why Republicans said as of 1890 was because during the roughly 20 years between 1890 and 1910, there was this whole slew of Italian and Greek immigrants into the United States, into the East Coast of the United States. Leonardo DiCaprio made a movie about this, The Gangs of New York, about basically the conflict between the relatively darker Italians and the lighter and redheaded and blonde and whatnot Irish and Scandinavians, but principally the Irish. Well, that law said that you had to maintain the racial balance that was here in 1890. That law got overturned in 1965 with the Immigration Act of 1965. LBJ signed it into law, which says that we're no longer doing racial quotas. And as a result, a lot of black and brown people started coming to the United States. And the result of that was that 2014, just 11 years ago, was the first year that non-white children outnumbered white kids in the nation's public schools. So that's probably, this year or next year will probably be the first year that non-white kids outnumber high school graduates, although, we'll see. So, the process of making America white again is step one is to go back to blocking people from S-hole countries, in other words, black countries, number one. And number two, to attack the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Now, the subject to the jurisdiction thereof was written in there to exclude Native Americans because their nations were claiming sovereignty, and the children of foreign diplomats. They are not, or until the Native American Inclusion Act, which I believe was in the 1930s, I'd have to go back and look, but it was some time ago, but about 100 years ago. But until then, Native Americans were not considered citizens of the United States, even with the 14th Amendment. So that subject to the jurisdiction thereof clause has actually been a giant loophole in the 14th Amendment birthright citizenship. So what the Republicans are saying now, or at least the Trumpies, the Trumpsters, or whatever we're going to end up calling them, the Nazis, what they're saying is that if you're here illegally without documentation, you are technically not subject to the jurisdiction of America. America doesn't even know you're here. And if you're not subject to that jurisdiction, then neither is the baby that you have here. And therefore, that baby is not eligible for American citizenship. Now, this is no doubt, there will be a lawsuit. This is going to go to the Supreme Court. This is what Trump wants. And he's hoping that he can get 5 votes on the Supreme Court to say, yeah, You know, illegal immigrants are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and therefore their children cannot be citizens. And therefore, let's strip the citizenship of millions of mostly Hispanics whose parents came to the United States illegally. We'll see how this plays out. Another part of Trump's plan, strip women and minorities of political and economic power. This starts with outlawing abortion or ending the right to an abortion in the United States. And then also making voting harder for Black, Hispanic, Native American people, women whose birth certificates don't have the same name as their driver's license. This is a big problem, you know, in many Republican-controlled states. And also rolling back DEI programs. DEI programs, as I said, you know, principally benefit women. But also, if you look at the composition of Trump's incoming administration and cabinet, it's reasonable to assume that non-white people must be willing to play the same role that Samuel L. Jackson did in Django Unchained if they want a position in the Trump administration. Next is gutting workers' rights. You'll recall Donald Trump congratulated Elon Musk on that infamous X Live event where, you know, for firing people who say that they want to form a union. And Musk laughs and says, yeah. And Bezos, of course, is virulently anti-union over on Amazon. Rigging election outcomes. When the plantation oligarchs ended democracy in the Old South, you know, in the 1840, 1860 era, they continued to allow elections. But if, and only white men could vote, but if white men voted for people who were not the preferred candidates of the oligarchs who ran the Old South, they could end up beaten or even lynched. So now we've got, of course, the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act with the Shelby County decision. Immediately after that, in Republican-run states, 1,600 voting places were closed, the majority of them in Black neighborhoods. Greg Palast, he's going to be on the program on Thursday about this, estimates that had this not happened and every eligible voter was allowed to vote and every vote was counted, Kamala Harris would be president today. Nakedly taking bribes, another piece of this. The governors of the Old South and the politicians of the Old South, you know, danced to the tune of the oligarchs. A phony veneer of Christianity, another characteristic of the Old South that was used to justify slavery. Making queer people invisible. They want to, well, Trump outlawed being trans yesterday by issuing an executive order saying there's only two genders. And next up, you know, they're going to go after gay marriage and gay adoption. Using schools for indoctrination, they want to micromanage school curriculum. Using militias for terror. You know, it used to be the Klan. Now it's going to be, you know, these other militia groups that we all know about. And Trump just, of course, released a whole bunch of these people. And the bottom line is that the oligarchy is here.